Welcome into what I'm calling Owned Media Live. This is an experiment that we're doing over the next couple of months, and I'm really excited to have my LinkedIn community here with us. So, if you don't know me, my name is Erin Trafford. I'm a communications and media consultant in Canada. I am based on the East Coast in Nova Scotia. I'm also the CEO at Story Studio Network, where we act as a newsroom for brands and organizations. We specialize in podcasting, we specialize in broadcast and storytelling through what we call an owned media lens. And that is the premise that we start today's conversation. So I'm really excited for you to be here with me here to talk about this new frontier in media. This is, as I said, a brand new initiative here at Story Studio, and certainly for me personally. And just before we really get going into today's topic, which is this overarching what is owned media and how is it evolving, I just want to give you a little bit of a sense of if this is for you, if this is worth your time, because I know your time is super, super valuable. And I want you to make sure that you feel cozy and in the right place. So, this is definitely a conversation that will be salient to you if you are a corporate communicator. Maybe you work in strategic comms, you might be a freelancer, you might be a fractional, you might work for a large organization. But if communications is in your bailiwick, this is for you. I'll also say that this would be for you if you are in media. Or I will say this with all the love in my heart if you are transitioning or planning a transition from media, the traditional mainstream legacy type media. So you might be feeling disillusioned. The industry may have recently left you. Any of those things. This will be an eye-opening series for you to continuously tune into. By the way, we're going to try to do this weekly over the next, 6 or 7 weeks. The other thing this would be for you if you would just have a general interest in understanding how to drive a narrative in your sector. So you may not necessarily be a comms or a marketing person, but you might be just interested in elevating the amazing juice, squeezing that lemon in your sector and finding out new ways that you can do that. And so you might be presenting that to your board or to your C-suite, or maybe you have a really small team. So basically, anyone who's interested in storytelling and communications and the evolution therein, this owned media LinkedIn Live podcast YouTube series is going to be for you. So I would encourage you to jump into the comments if you're here. Let me know what your questions are over time, and really buckle up, because it's going to be fun. So before we dive into the definitions of owned media, because that's where we are going to start today, there's just a couple of kind of housekeeping things that I want to get over. Just invite you to participate in. So the first is that we just launched the Owned Media newsletter last night. So it went out to our subscribers. If you're not on the list, there's a couple of ways for you to get on that list, namely by checking out some of our new, what we're calling rapid deployment resources. So my goal is really for you to start to lean into this nuanced conversation about media and to start anywhere. One of the key questions that we get, and the most common questions that we get at Story Studio Network, is this all feels really great, and I want to bring this to my organization, but where do I start? And my answer is start anywhere. So if that's you, we've actually got something appropriately called the Start Anywhere Owned Media resource. And it's a free download. It's actually just a PDF Google Doc, but it's, 5 or 6 pages, and it really will help you make those decisions about where in the process you can start. Because the truth is there's no good place or bad place to start. The key is to start anywhere. So we've created a resource for you to help navigate some of those questions and to pick a starting point for you, and then really think of it as a circle. So you're just going to go around and round. There's no beginning and no end. So that will be one way that you can download that resource and get on our newsletter. The other thing that you can do is check out our latest resource, which is 60 plus interview questions to make you a better podcaster, interviewer, panel host, any and all of those things. So all of those will be linked somewhere, wherever you are checking this out. So if you're on LinkedIn, it'll be in the description. If you're on YouTube, it will be in the description. So avail yourself of all of those resources, and we look forward to seeing you on our newsletter list. Okay, so we've kind of gotten all of that over and done with. We've talked about what you can do right now to get started. So download those resources. But let's really dig into what is owned media. What is owned media? And I asked this question before pulling this all together. And a lot of folks answered exactly how you would expect them to answer. So saying things like owned media is basically putting all your content on a platform that you own. End of sentence. End of sentence. They were like, okay, this is what owned media is. It's putting your content on a platform that you own. And if you're sitting there thinking, yeah, that's exactly what it is. I own my email list, for example. That would be owned media. Yes. I own my website. That is owned media. Yes. But, and this is the big but, that definition is really becoming more focused lately with the evolution of digital media, with the evolution of the media landscape, of traditional media, of all of those things. And if you're here, actually, I would invite you to respond to this question. So, what is owned media? In your opinion, when someone says you need to own your media, what is your general response? How do you generally interpret that? Because I'll tell you right away, you're not wrong. This isn't like a gotcha situation. But what I'm going to invite you to do is to start thinking about it in a more nuanced and focused kind of way, especially if you are in corporate communications, especially if you're doing not-for-profit work, kind of big impact level stories. You're not out there selling mattresses or consumer packaged goods or, area rugs or couch cushions, right? You're out there communicating at scale about big impact stories. And if that is you, I'm super curious what you think owning your media means. I'm going to dive in and tell you what I think owned media is now and what we're starting to see over at Story Studio Network with respect to owned media. So 4 years ago, 3 years ago, even 2 years ago, you'd hear people say owning your media simply means owning the data. Okay. And you're not wrong. It is owning the platform. So it's, always be moving people from social onto an email list, because your email list you can take with you. If Instagram goes down, if LinkedIn shuts down, if YouTube decides to block you, whatever happens, you own that list. And yes, that is very critical and important to your organization. And that has not changed. Okay. That has not changed. But I'm going to get you to think at a different level now. Okay. There is an evolved definition of owned media, and the one we use at Story Studio Network has 3 critical components. So I'm going to say this slowly and you can take notes, but we're going to start unpacking this over the next 6 to 7 weeks as we do lives, God willing. Okay. So owned media, as per Story Studio Network, is any media that you own. So we just talked about that, meaning a platform upon which you're the majority controller. It is comprised of a message and or storyline and or narrative, choose your word, that you also own. And here's the critical part. The third leg of this stool is that it engages and grows an audience of champions and or cheerleaders with whom you have a measurable relationship. Okay, so there's 3 key things. Not that long ago, the only thing we were focused on was the first thing. Do I own the audience? Do I have a CSV export of this list of people? But you know what that does? You know what that does when you're talking about really high level stories, really critical stories, messages that need to get out because they shape policy, because they shape culture, because they shape lifestyle, because they shape nations, is that creates a very transactional relationship with your supporters. And that's okay if your business is majority transactional. Going back to the click to buy, that's great if you're in a click to buy world, but you're not. If you're listening to this, it's because you're not in a click to buy world. You are in the business of building a better world, of creating more impact. So for you, the concept of owned media needs to have those three components. And when it does, I can tell you it's like magic, but it doesn't happen overnight. So I'm going to break that down a little bit more for you today. And then, like I said, we're going to try these lives over and over again until I get it right. And we're going to do them weekly. So as questions arise for you, make sure that you're asking them and bringing them up. And I promise you that I will bring them either to the lives or to the newsletter. Okay. There's going to be kind of two companion pieces to this education. So critical for you to understand is that owned media is about both the size and the depth of the impact you are making for your organization and the audience over time. It is not a flash in a pan. It's not about controlling just that email list. It's about securing the impact on the audience over time. So those three key elements, again, I'm going to say them in a different way so that you can start to hear it differently and let it really land for you. Platform equals control. You absolutely need that. The storyline is your position. You absolutely need that. And the audience you curate determines the impact. You absolutely need that. Okay. So for any of you who are tuning back into this rebooted live here on LinkedIn, let me know if that is landing for you. How did that feel for me to just express owned media in that new way for you? I'm super, super curious. So let's explore a little bit further, okay? I don't want to take up too much of your time today. We're going to come back next week, but I want to keep exploring this. So the platform is very simple, and I'm positive that most of you understand that in the sense that you've heard the phrase, don't build on rented land. You've heard that phrase, and you've probably really leaned into it, and that's great. Okay. In the digital space, the rented land is anything that you don't own. So I don't own this LinkedIn platform, which is why I couldn't fully control what was going on with the first time we tried to go live, right? I don't own it. I don't own my connection to you. I own it if we exchange emails in the direct message. And you know this, right? This is always the goal, is to get closer to the source so that you're not reliant on the platform. And then the email list, right? You start to build that email list. You start to leverage that email list. But here's a funny little tidbit that most people don't realize is that your podcast is also owned media. I don't know how many of you knew that. So put your hands up if you knew that. Gold star for you. If you didn't, that's okay. This is a judgment-free zone. But your owned media is your podcast, because when you technically build a podcast, it sits on something called an RSS feed. And that RSS feed is platform agnostic, which means if one of the platforms shuts down, you still own that RSS feed and the subscribers associated with it. So if you are going out to create a podcast and you're going to work with a network, you should make sure that you own that audience and all that IP. We do that at Story Studio Network. We don't claim ownership over that for you, right? We don't, because that's silly. You're creating a podcast to create an asset. So your podcast is part of that, just so you know. And that's also why we've started leaning into it very, very heavily with Story Studio Network, because a podcast can be this beautiful foundational piece of owned media upon which you can build a whole bunch of other things. I see this is working now. I see Lindsay is here. Thank you, my friend. You just gave me so much soothe. I love this. Okay. So we know this about rented land, but let's talk about the other couple ways to understand owned media that feed into that definition I gave you at the beginning, which is through a comparative lens to earned media. Okay. Like, I don't even know where to begin with this. So I'm not going to go down a huge rabbit hole on earned media strategies today. Because we would literally be here all day. But I will tell you, and you know this because you're smart people, is that any good PR firm is going to tell you that the game is entirely different today than it was pre-pandemic and even early pandemic. The game in earned is just different. The way your stories are pitched is different. The way newsrooms and editorial departments run is different. There are new pressures almost daily in the earned media environment that are making it a lot harder for these big, what I'm going to say, sector level stories that require nuanced explanation, that are looking for this targeted audience. Lindsay in the comments saying getting that right audience is so critical. It's true. It's actually this really funny dichotomy where like the biggest stories often require the most niche audience in order to create the biggest impact. It's a bit of a chicken and egg, right? And earned media used to be a really great way to curate that niche audience. And I'm not knocking it. I think it's incredibly important to have as part of your strategy still and ever thus. My point is that it is changing. It is rapidly changing. And so you need to start mitigating that risk and managing that. And how do you do that? Well, our answer is owned media. And that's why we come to that middle part of the definition, meaning that critical to owning your media is owning your position. And I would say it's almost 50-50 when I'm out talking to people about what we do and I'm trying to qualify, are you ready to jump into owned media? A key red flag for me is when an organization says something that sounds like, you know, we like to be neutral on everything. We don't like to take a stance on anything. We don't rock boats. We don't say anything controversial, right? And for me, that tells me that they're just not ready to truly own something. They're not going to own a position. They're going to let everybody else position themselves around them, and that's fine. And that works for some organizations. And let me be clear, being controversial doesn't mean being a jerk. It just means standing for something. It means maybe giving a little bit of tension or a little bit of pressure on something to create movement. It doesn't have to mean being acrimonious or over the top. But critical to owning your media is actually having something to say and really planting that flag and standing there and saying it to the right people, right? So when you're looking at earned as your only option, and given all the pressures happening with earned newsrooms, I've heard stats. There are some reporters and producers right now that are getting upwards of 250 pitches a day. Like, it is not even realistic, let alone then you think about how much real estate is left in the digital newspapers and on the morning shows and all on the talk shows. There's no real estate and they're getting inundated. So you do need to take a stand and own that position for yourself, regardless of what's happening with your earned strategy. So with all of this in mind, let's just move to like kind of that third leg of the stool. And let's talk about the impact on the audience, because that's actually the secret sauce to all of this. Okay. Too often we see, like I said, these incredible potential clients, but this is what happens is they'll come to us and say, okay, we're ready to do this. We're ready. We're ready. We understand we need to have an email list. We're going to have a podcast. We're going to pump it all out. We've got something to say, and we're going to do it based on this campaign. And that's a C word. That's a C word for me. Okay. Again, nothing wrong with focused communications. Nothing wrong with it. I encourage it. It helps our brains to wrap our heads around how to get things done, how to measure things. I get it. However, getting too stuck in campaign-driven thinking with respect to your owned media is going to create more challenges than it needs to. And here's what I mean, is that when you're in a constant, borderline for some folks, compulsive state of creating new, oh, it's a new quarter, new campaign. Oh, it's a new quarter, new campaign. Oh, it's a new quarter, new campaign. My gosh. You're not looking backwards and forwards. And with owned media, the key is to look really far ahead. And that's why this all works together. You own the platform, you own the position, and you own the audience and understand if you hook them today, you're thinking about the impact on them 2, 3, 5 years down the road. You can't do that in a 3-month campaign. Can you engage them in a 3-month campaign? Yes. Can you create measurable results within the 3-month campaign? Yes. Can you do some really cool stuff within a 3-month time frame? Yeah, you totally can. But with your owned media, you need to really look at it as a long-term play. How is this all going to feed back to us in 3, 2, 3, 5 years? As I said, 5 years is a little far out. I would say 3. Okay. So we're always looking at that. And here's the beautiful thing. We're not going to get into this today. We'll talk about this maybe next week or the week after. But at every key point, platform, storyline, audience, there are actual KPIs and measurable things that you can look at, which we like. This isn't just airy fairy. Okay. But shifting to that strategy and shifting your mindset is the key thing you need to do. Start asking yourself, I'm not going to say better questions, just different questions. So I'm going to look at the comments section. Thank you guys, my friends, for acknowledging that I'm live. This really, really helps. And I won't screw up next week, I promise. I'm going to look at the comments and then I'm going to give you guys some homework. It's really simple. 3 questions I want you to tweak in your mind until we meet again. And I want you to, send me feedback either in DM, email, comment on LinkedIn, even if you tackle one of the questions, like how is it shifting for you? All right. So Lindsay already mentioned like that whole issue of curating the right audience is critical and how to get the right people who want or need the info 100%, right? It is a process of unpacking and peeling that onion to get to that right audience. And that's why we can't look at it in a 3-month time frame. You just can't. You have to look longer. Pam saying a challenge for charities and not-for-profits is they often don't have the budgets to create their own owned media. I like that you mentioned this, Pam, because I agree. It is a huge issue. Budget is an issue. The other side of that budget question is the time side, right? Time and money, time and money. It's kind of the same equation. So I am going to devote one of our lives and a newsletter to looking at different ways of calculating that return. Because sometimes it just comes down to being able to articulate the actual dollars and cents in a new way. And it's not about the performance of the content. Remember, sometimes you're going after a very niche audience. So those performance numbers are never going to be spectacular. The other red flag that I get is when folks come to me and say, I want to be the next Joe Rogan. And I say, that's so nice. You're welcome for the coffee. See you later. Because that doesn't make sense as a goal to me. And Lindsay saying, what I love about Owned is it can be authentically organic and inexpensive. 100%. It just has to be driven and wrapped around a purpose. But the key is what you're saying. The key is, I like to say, it can't be too tipsy. Your owned media is not where you put your tips and tricks. Leave your tips and tricks for Instagram or your blog or, I don't know, a PDF download like the ones that we've created, right? I have tons of tips and tricks. So put them all in a PDF. I'm like, you want my tips and tricks? Just download them. But we don't need to talk about it. Okay. All right. So are you guys ready for your homework? I used to do this on my first podcast, Permission to Leap, and my listeners loved it. They were like, what's the homework this week, Erin? Okay, so I'm going to do this here on LinkedIn for you. I'm going to give you 3 questions to ponder as we foray into owned media together. And I apologize, I'm a little over time just because of that misstep off the top, but we'll generally be wrapping this by the bottom of the hour, week over week. Okay, so question number 1 is ask yourself this. What percentage of your current comms and media strategy do you actually own? You want that percentage to be as high as possible. And do the calculation. Like, don't just guesstimate. Take the 15 minutes and do the calculation. Okay. So that's number 1. Number 2, take a hard look at your earned media spend, at your earned media efforts, and ask yourself, Can you quantify the cost of attention you are driving? If the answer is no to what I just said to Pam, then stick with me, subscribe to the newsletter because I'm going to help you with that. Okay. So the second one is take a look at your earned media spend and don't stop doing it, but ask yourself with what level of precision can you quantify the cost of that attention? And then the third piece is to ask yourself again, honestly, if your company didn't sell anything, and I know for many of you tuning in right now, you don't sell stuff. If you didn't have revenue goals, remember this is purely a mind exercise, okay? What values would you stand behind? What would still be true about your company, about you, and about what you do? Because that is the nugget. That is the germination point for your entire owned media strategy. You have to take the money out of it for a minute and think about it energetically from a different level. All right. I think I got through this. I think we did this. I think we might have done it twice. But that's it for me this week. We're going to aim to be back here next Tuesday. I know it's going to be a super busy day because lots of kids are back to school, but we're going to do it and the replay will be there. We're going to put this up on our YouTube channel. And don't forget to check out our new free rapid deployment resources. So we've got those 60 interview questions to make you a better interviewer. And then we've also got the Start Anywhere strategy plan. And that one is designed for you to quite literally just place yourself into this world and take one step. Just take one step. And you'll be on the newsletter, and then you can take many more steps. All right. Thanks, guys, for tuning in. I appreciate each and every one of you, and your time is so valuable. So thank you so much. And we will be back next week. I will see you then. Thank you. Okay. Bye.